Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Bob Welch. I'm going to discuss today the poll that was conducted for the Wisconsin corn growers back at the end of May. 500 likely voters in Wisconsin, plus or minus 4%. We're going to discuss the findings as they relate to ethanol and the Wisconsin regarding ethanol and the farmers that grow it. So first slide, we just got a couple slides here we're going to do. We tested on basically a thermometer, a scale of 0 to 100, how do you feel about groups, and two that were the highest were the two that actually are the ones who are the spokespeople in Wisconsin for ethanol and alternative fuel, corn growers themselves, and the American Lung Association, both with ratings of 70 out of a 0 to 100, which is a very, very high rating. So people in Wisconsin are very open to the people who have been talking about ethanol over the last decade, and so that was a good sign that the people who are speaking for us are very well regarded, shall we say. We'll go to the next slide then. And this is the key finding of the whole poll, which we'll focus on for a while. Ethanol is favored in Wisconsin, and it's basically, the question was whether it would be, you'd favor or oppose using it as 10% of your fuel, which is basically all the fuel in Wisconsin currently, pretty much all the fuel in Wisconsin currently does have 10% ethanol in it. We do have some E85 and just beginning to have E15, but the vast majority of ethanol that is burned is burned as an E10 blend. And in the state of Wisconsin, 60% favor its use as opposed to 32% who don't. So a 2-to-1 margin, which is, in polling world, that's a very overwhelmingly favorable opinion. And the strongly opposed, strongly favor is about even, which you'd expect. So it's a very, very good result in terms of ethanol being popular with people in the state. You'll see that women, it's a little more popular with women than with men. And perhaps the most surprising result of the entire poll is that in the Milwaukee area, where there's been a lot more negative press, shall we say, about ethanol, there really was no difference between Milwaukee and the rest of the state. So seeing that negativity that was out there did not stick, or at least did not stick in a significant way. And that negativity was based on a total misunderstanding that renewable fuel, that the kind of fuel that was required in the Milwaukee area, which has a different kind of gas, that somehow the problems they were having when they first introduced that was because of ethanol, when in fact ethanol wasn't even in the fuel when it was first introduced 20 years ago. So that's our main finding, and then when we delve further in, we can find that people, the reason that they are supportive of ethanol is because they understand some really basic facts about ethanol. First, they understand that corn growers are growing more corn more efficiently on their land, and so they're able to produce enough corn to supply the ethanol industry without taking away from other uses of corn. So they do understand that, and that about 70% understood that, and that's a major thing, a major communication point that we've been trying to make over the last several years, that we're not using up all the corn because farmers are just producing more and more every year. And so that point has been made, and I think that is sort of another big finding, that people do understand that. They also understand that it's locally grown. They understand, as opposed to having to import oil, Wisconsin doesn't have any oil, whether it's coming from Texas, Alaska, or the Middle East, we still have to import it. Whereas corn is grown locally, and we produce enough ethanol here to supply all our needs, plus we export it, which means also we help create jobs here. And that is another thing that about 7% of the people did understand. That reduces our dependence on foreign oil, helps create jobs. Other positive findings that people did understand, that it does save consumers money at the pump, and that it's a renewable fuel that burns cleaner. Two separate points: that it's renewable, and also that it burns cleaner. Those are things that we've come a long way in the last 3-4 years in terms of getting people to understand. There was some misinformation out there at first on how clean ethanol was and how it burns, but that's been cleaned up for the most part. Also, saving money at the pump, I think we still have a ways to go on that, but we have been able to get people to understand that ethanol is cheaper than gasoline. You know, just a few days ago I checked on the market, and ethanol was about 70 cents cheaper than gas. It's been averaging $1 to 50 cents cheaper, depending on when you check, and that's on the Chicago Board of Trade. So that's not a made-up number. Also, because ethanol is in the marketplace, there's been some studies done that show that because there hasn't been any refinery expansion for gasoline in this country for many, many years, we have been able to expand the marketplace for refined fuel in America, and because of that, studies done at UW-Madison right here in Wisconsin show that we could be saving as much as $1 a gallon at the pump because ethanol is in the marketplace. In other words, if you shut down all the ethanol plants tomorrow, gas prices would go up by about $1. But even if you don't believe that, we can see just by looking at the market that we're saving 10 to 15% of every gallon we buy. So those have been got out. There's a few things we're still working on to get people to understand. First is that ethanol is fine in your vehicle. There's still a significant number of people out there, not a majority, but a significant number of people out there who think that the ethanol, even at 10% levels, could damage their automobile. And that's just scientifically not true. So that is a myth that we are diligently trying to make sure that we bust, to make sure people understand that there's nothing wrong with ethanol fuel at 10% levels in your vehicle. We have a little more education to do. Of course, now we're working on E15, which is only some vehicles, and there's going to be some confusion on that for a while, I expect. But on E10, there shouldn't be any confusion. It should be very cut and dry, black and white, that E10 is fine in your automobile. The other thing that we have continuously have to work on educating people on is that as you put corn into ethanol plants, that it does not raise the price of food. And there are really two key facts here that we have. We're getting out. We're making great progress from 3 years ago, but we still have some work to do. And that is that when you put a corn kernel into an ethanol plant, only part of that kernel goes into ethanol, and the other part of that kernel goes into feed or food. Some of it actually goes into carbon dioxide, which is used in the beverage and preservation industries. But so we still have feed for animals and food coming out of that kernel of corn even after the ethanol is produced. And people just aren't as aware of that as they should be. Again, that is not an opinion, that is a fact that happens at an ethanol plant. And so there has been a lot of messaging in that recently, and that is something that we're going to continue to try to get out there to people so they understand it. The other thing is that as corn is put into an ethanol plant, people have been under the impression that because that's taking it out of the marketplace, my food prices must go up. And again, this will be a difficult one. We've again made great progress in the last 3 or 4 years. Our polling shows people are starting to understand that. But people don't understand that for most products in that supermarket, the amount of corn in them, whether it's corn flakes, which is all corn, or whether it's a steak, which is from a steer that was fed corn, or whether it's something that has just a small amount of corn product in it, whatever that is, the amount of value of that corn is a very, very small amount of money. For example, in a box of corn flakes, which is, let's say, $3.70, only about 6 to 10 cents of that is the price of corn. So the price of corn can double, and it's going to have a very small impact on corn flakes. And you need to understand, in today's marketplace, corn right now is selling for $3.50 a bushel, which is historically about the same as it was selling 50 years ago. So there was a spike in corn prices last year, but even that, by historical standards, was very low. So when adjusted for inflation, corn prices are very historically low right now because farmers have gotten more efficient. So as corn prices go up or down because of drought or other conditions, that happens, but it isn't because of ethanol production, because as I mentioned earlier, we've been able to have that tremendous increase in production through the efficiency of the corn growers. So people have to understand that, and again, they are, but we needed more work there. But also, they have to understand that fuel prices are perhaps just as big a factor in the prices at the grocery store as our farm prices. And by holding down the price of gasoline at the pump, we are actually helping to save money at the grocery store. Because all the trucking that has to get done, all the processing that has to get done takes fuel. And as we help to keep fuel prices down, in many ways, we're actually helping to keep the price at the grocery store reduced. So when corn went to $8 a bushel, we heard all this screaming that somehow that was ethanol's fault and prices at the grocery store were going up, when in fact, now that they're down to $3.50 a bushel, you don't see prices at the grocery store coming down, and you don't hear people saying, oh, hooray, we must have been wrong last year when we were talking about the $8 corn prices. When we looked at the verbatims, in other words, when people answer a poll, we try to give them an open-ended question and say, okay, do you support ethanol? If so, why? Do you oppose ethanol? If so, why? And it's very revealing to see what just sort of came off the sort of the tip of their head. You know, what was the first thing that they associated with ethanol? And that the top things for people who were supportive of ethanol were that it was made right here, that it was produced by farmers, that it was domestic, that it was renewable, that it was cheaper, and that it was cleaner. You know, all those things, those are reasons why they would be supportive of ethanol. Among those that disagreed or were not opposed or that were opposed to ethanol, the biggest ones were engine, could hurt my car, or that the mileage would be hurt, and then the food versus fuel argument was sort of in second place. So we still, like in those areas I mentioned, we still have a little work to do in terms of educating people. But the good news is those are we don't have to convince people in an argument. We just have to educate them, because these are just facts that we're talking about. So we also did look at what people were familiar or unfamiliar with. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I think people, again, generally understand that ethanol is made from corn grown here in Wisconsin, and that it cuts our dependence on foreign oil. They generally understand that it does keep our gas prices from going up higher, and they do understand that because of new technology, farmers are growing more corn more efficiently, and so that it does not impact food or feed prices. Could be better there, but that's much, much better than it was before. We've also looked at what people would need to hear to change their mind if they do oppose ethanol. And I think generally the things we talked about, just more education, getting people to be more understanding of this. This is still a very new product. Really, it's only been in the marketplace in a significant way for about 10 years, whereas as opposed to gasoline that's been around for well over 100. So we still have a bit of work to do to make sure people understand. But the good news of today, the good news of this poll, is that here in Wisconsin, by a 2-to-1 margin, people do support the use of ethanol in their fuel.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Bob. I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. And as I'm looking at our comment feed, we don't have any questions that have come up right now, but if we do have any of those, we'll make sure we send them over to you, and then the WBIA will share those through our channels and through email as well.
Very good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We appreciate you taking the time.
All right.